Welcome to the second episode of Keep It Clean. Let's start drilling into prop drilling.
Let me help with that.
Okay, you can keep it at 10. Who knows? It can be useful. But let's start from the beginning. So, prop drilling is a very common anti-pattern where you pass prop from an upper component through all the descendants only to reach the component that need it. Okay? Often you end up drilling very deep. Okay. Sometimes it is necessary to do it, but often you can avoid it like that.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it feels like the most obvious approach. So why are you complaining?
For example, one main problem is performance. Do you remember Memo from the previous episode?
Yep. Give me a sec. Done. I just rewatched it. Folks, you may want to do the same if you need a refresher. So I suppose that you end up causing a re-render of all the intermediary components for nothing more than passing a prop to the lower ones, right?
You hit the point. You make life difficult for the Memo IOC.
Okay, so there must be a better way.
Yeah, or this video would not have sense to exist. The solution is context.
Well, I guess the title of the video was a spoiler. So, what is a context?
Context is a way to share data from a top component called provider to all its descendants, down to the last, the very last leaf. Let's go through an example. Here we have a simple example like the old one that we used in the previous episode, and you have the site with some page, with some layout, and you have the team information. Okay, probably team is not a very good example because not fit all the cases. There could be some edge cases, but if you think about it, probably you can solve it without any problem. Okay, here you have a classical example where you have the set state for the current team, and you have the value of the state, and you pass it down to the page through the layout, through the header nav, through the team switcher, and you reach the team icon and the team button.
Well, where you are
All
actually
wonderful.
using the value. Finally.
Yeah, exactly. All wonderful, but you have made a lot of passing of prop to reach that. Okay. And now let's go through a real good example. That is the context. You have that file, that is the team context tsx. It's really easy. You have I've exposed a team provider and a use team. The team provider is a component, the use team is a hook function. And how you use it? It's simple. You wrap a component to which you want to share the data with a team provider, like that one, and all its descendants can access the team provider using the use team hook. It's really easy.
Does it mean can I have that I can have at most one instance of a context, or can I override a context by any nested provider of the same type?
Good question. Yes, you can. So when you request a context, the use context hook searches in the gesture of the current component to find the closest available context of the desired type. So to make an example, in that case, you have the page that here can access the context, but like in the real example, also the button that are underneath. But if you put a context and you wrap, for example, the header nav component, from here to here, you access that provider. But if you put a provider, that one, for example, here, for example, okay. If you do something like that, all the descendants of the header nav component access to that provider and not to the one of the top.
Yeah. So we can
really
say
easy.
something like it's local to that branch of the virtual DOM tree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Then, but how the context really works? Okay, React offers you some APIs to create the context, the create context, and some APIs to access the context, the use context. I create the context with the create context, and I have that variable, team context, that has inside a provider that is a component. Okay. That provider receive a value. Okay, it's really easy. That value has some property that you can use to access the current team or set the current team. If you set the current team, the use state is triggered and the current teams get an update. So the team provider is rendered. The children probably have a memo, so no, it doesn't render the child. The child. But if you are subscribed to that context and you are using the use context, so you see you receive the update from the provider, you have a rendering the component that is subscribed. How the context know if it need a render or not because the context value change, simply using the value. So doing shallow comparison, it checks the previous value with the new value. If it's different, then it goes a call for all the subscribers, a render, sorry, for all the subscribed component.
Okay.
Really easy.
Good.
So, moving on, did you notice some full-time rendering in some components?
Well, I guess that both the team icon and the team button are subscribed to the same context. So when the current team changes, the buttons are also re-rendered, despite the fact that they don't use the value, but only the setter.
Yeah, exactly. But let's optimize it further. Okay, considering that the render happen when the value passed to a React context provider changes, the simple solution, as you can see, is to duplicate the main hidden context. Okay. Here you have the duplication, and you have obviously the use team and a new use handler team to allow access to the team handler context. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, one thing that I missed to say is that I created that use team and use team handler function by accessing the context and then checking if it is undefined. If it is undefined, I throw an error because you have to surround with my provider. But it's not always a rule because, for example, if you want to have an optional context, you can manage it in another way. But this is one of the standard way to do that. Okay. Let's continue. One, for example, contains the data that can change frequently, and the other one contains the handler function that goes the mutation of the data. Like that one. No, sorry, that one. Okay. It's obvious that that function doesn't need to update frequently because set current team is something that never change inside React because the dispatcher never change. So it's one of the reasons because I didn't set it as a dependent. here. Okay, so probably the context will never trigger a render itself to the subscribed component for the handler. But how we use it, it's really simple. We do the same of the previous one for the data, and you use the useTheme handler where you need to change the theme, like here.
Okay,
It's
so
really simple.
here is $1 million question. Should I always
Okay.
use context, or is there a rule of thumb that I can follow?
Yeah, it is difficult to define a precise rule. It is just a matter of practice and experience, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there are no silver bullets.
Exactly. Props are details needed to the component to work. In general, you have to avoid doing a telephone game using intermediate components like a courier. Contexts are an easy way to share information to the descendants and are typically bound to a specific domain. One task that is particularly fitted to this definition is separation of concern.
Yeah, good old separation of concern.
Exactly. And in my opinion, is the best practice to follow because it allows you to have a well-isolated business logic from the UI, keeping the code clean at first, but also more easy to test. We can make some more realistic and complex examples to show how to better implement the separation of concern. But we have run out of time for today. Time to go!
See you next time, folks!